What if you did a DNA test on your own child and discovered you weren't the father, but you were also completely faithful? What if science told you that you were a stranger to your own blood, not because your wife betrayed you, but because your own body had been lying to you for your entire life? This is not fiction. This is the story of Kim Jae-won, a man who lost everything chasing a truth that was hiding inside him all along. Stay until the end. In the underground world of Seoul's most dangerous corridors, there were names people whispered and names people feared. Kim Jae-won was both. They called him Guishin, the ghost. Not because he moved silently, though he did. Not because he disappeared without a trace, though that too was true. They called him Ghost because no one had ever been able to read him. Not enemies, not allies, not even the men who had bled for him for decades. Jae-won was 32 years old when he stood at the top of one of Seoul's most feared criminal organizations. He had not inherited it, he had built it piece by piece with cold intelligence, controlled fury, and a strategic mind so sharp that even men twice his age bowed their heads when he walked into a room. He was, by every visible measure, invincible. And yet, for all the power that wrapped around him like armor, there was something beneath Kim Jae-won that no one ever saw. A loneliness so deep it had its own gravity. He had been born in Busan to a mother who worked 3 jobs and a father whose name was never spoken aloud. He had no siblings, no extended family who claimed him. He had clawed his way from poverty to power with only his mind and his will. And in doing so, he had arrived at the top of an empire, utterly alone. Until the night he walked into a jazz bar on the edge of Itaewon and heard someone laugh. Not giggle, not chuckle, laugh, full, unashamed, from somewhere deep in the belly, the kind of laugh that doesn't ask permission and doesn't apologize. He turned, and there she was. Her name was Adaeze Okafor, and she was, by her own admission, completely out of place in that bar. She was a 29-year-old medical researcher from Lagos, brilliant, stubborn, and possessed of a joy so infectious it made strangers feel like they had known her all their lives. She had come to Seoul on a 2-year research fellowship, studying rare genetic disorders at one of the city's most prestigious universities. She had stumbled into the jazz bar because it started raining, and she'd left her umbrella at the lab again. She was laughing because her friend had just spilled an entire glass of wine on the menu, trying to impress the waiter. Jae-won had walked past 100 beautiful women in his life and felt nothing. He had been with women who were engineered for seduction, draped in silk and strategy. He had remained unmoved. But Adaeze was not engineered for anything. She was entirely, completely, unashamedly herself. He sat down nearby and ordered something he didn't drink, just to stay close to that sound. They didn't speak that night. He watched her leave, laughing still, holding her friend's hand and jumping over a puddle at the door. He told his driver to find out who she was. It took 3 weeks before they were in the same room again, this time deliberately. He had arranged it through a mutual contact with a subtlety that he had never applied to anything except war. When she saw him across the room and their eyes met for the first time, she did not look away nervously. She tilted her head slightly, the way a scientist looks at something interesting, and then she smiled like she already knew something he didn't. He was, for the first time in 20 years, nervous. They talked for 4 hours. About everything. About nothing. About genetic research and the ethics of power, about what it meant to carry something in your blood that no one else could see, about music, about Lagos and Busan, and how both cities smell like salt and ambition. He did not tell her what he was. Not yet. But she had a way of asking questions that made people tell the truth without realizing they had. By the end of the night, she knew more about Kim Jae-won than most of his lieutenants did. And she still smiled at him the same way. They fell into each other the way 2 storms do, loudly, powerfully, and in a way that changed the weather for everyone around them. Jae-won courted her the way he did everything, with precision and quiet intensity. He did not show off his wealth clumsily. He did not try to impress her with things. He simply showed up, consistently, attentively, in ways that told her she was being seen. A book she mentioned once, left on her doorstep 3 days later with a note. A restaurant in Busan she said she'd always wanted to try. A reservation appearing in her email for a Friday she had mentioned offhandedly was free. She was not naive. She was a researcher. She saw the details that didn't add up. The black cars, the men who stood too still at the edges of rooms, the way people moved aside for him like water around a stone. 3 months into what they were becoming, she sat across from him at dinner and said quietly and without drama, "Tell me what you actually do." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he told her everything. She was silent for what felt like a lifetime. Then she said, "I need a week." She took 6 days. On the 7th, she called him. "I am not going to pretend I'm afraid. I am. But I'm more afraid of not knowing what this could be. So I need you to promise me something." He said, "Anything." She said, "Never lie to me. Not once. I can survive a lot of things. I cannot survive being deceived by someone I trust." He promised. And Kim Jae-won, a man who had broken contracts, rivals, and bones without a second thought, kept that promise like it was sacred. Because with Adaeze, it was. They were married 14 months later. The wedding was small by Jae-won's standards, enormous by Adaeze's. She wore deep burgundy because she said white made her look like a cloud. She laughed during the vows, not nervously, but because the officiant made a small mistake and recovered so awkwardly that she couldn't help it. Jae-won laughed too, quietly, and for the first time in a decade, his face looked like it belonged to someone who had once been a child. His men, watching from the edges, didn't recognize him. Her friends from Lagos, watching from the front row, said later that they had never seen her glow like that. The world didn't know what to make of them, this terrifying Korean crime lord and her radiant Nigerian wife who could silence a room just by walking in. They were a contradiction that made complete sense if you paid attention. She made him softer without making him weaker. He made her safer without making her smaller. They were, against all odds and logic, perfect. 13 months after the wedding, Adaeze gave birth to a boy. They named him Seon-woo. It meant first universe, Jae-won's choice, though he'd never admit he cried when he suggested it. Seon-woo came into the world loud and hungry, and with his mother's eyes and his father's brow, and a laugh, already, even at weeks old, that filled rooms the way Adaeze's did. Jae-won, who had commanded armies of men without flinching, who had sat across negotiating tables from people who wanted him dead, who had built an empire from nothing with blood-stained hands, was absolutely undone by this baby. He held Seon-woo the way men hold things they are terrified of dropping, but he held him constantly. He rearranged entire schedules. He fired a lieutenant once for making too much noise outside the nursery. He learned the words to 3 different lullabies, which his second-in-command found out about and had the good sense never to mention. Adaeze watched her husband transform, and she thought, "This is why I stayed." Seon-woo grew. He was bold and curious, and stubborn in the way that made teachers tired and parents secretly proud. He had his mother's gift for asking questions that made adults feel slightly outwitted. He had his father's stillness, the way he could observe a room and understand it before anyone knew he was watching. He was simply wonderful. And for 10 years, their life was not easy. The world Jae-won moved in was never clean, but it was full of love, of heat, of arguments and reconciliations, and Sunday mornings and Adaeze's pipping and Jae-won's rare, brilliant smiles. For 10 years, they were a family. Then, Seon-woo got sick. It started the way these things always do, with something small. Fatigue that wouldn't lift. A pallor beneath Seon-woo's warm skin that Adaeze noticed first, because she was the scientist, because she always noticed first. They ran tests. The results came back, and the doctors sat them both down with the particular stillness of people delivering news they wish they weren't carrying. Seon-woo had a rare blood condition, serious but treatable, manageable. The critical first step, however, was finding a compatible blood donor, a parent ideally, a direct biological match. Jae-won didn't hesitate for a single second. "Take mine," he said, before the doctor finished explaining. He rolled up his sleeve himself. He did not ask questions. He did not wait. This was his son, and his son was hurting, and that was the only information Jae-won needed to act. The tests ran. The doctor asked to see him privately. Jae-won sat across the desk from the physician, a man who had clearly rehearsed this moment several times and was still not ready for it, and listened as the doctor explained, carefully, with many scientific qualifications, that the DNA analysis had produced an unexpected result. The biological markers did not align. Jae-won was not a match. Not because of blood type, not because of some technicality, because, according to every test the lab had run, Kim Jae-won was not the biological father of Kim Seon-woo. The room was very quiet for a very long time. Jae-won asked the doctor to run it again. They ran it again. The results were identical. There are different kinds of silences. There is the silence of peace, the kind that settles over you like a blanket. There is the silence of grief, the kind that floods in after the scream. And then there is the silence of a man whose entire world has just restructured itself around a new, unbearable truth. The silence of a man who was, before this moment, certain of the one thing he believed in more than power, more than empire, more than his own survival. Kim Jae-won sat in that silence and felt himself come apart in a way that no enemy had ever managed to achieve. He thought of Adaeze. He thought of 14 months of courtship, of 6 days she took to decide, of the promise she asked him to keep, of a wedding where she laughs at the wrong moment and it was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. He thought of 10 years. And then he thought, she lied. He went home. He did not rage. He did not throw things or raise his voice. He sat down across from Adaeze at the kitchen table where they had eaten 1,000 meals, and he put the documents in front of her, and he said, very quietly, in the voice he used when something was already decided, "Explain this to me." Adaeze looked at the papers. She looked at his face, and she understood immediately what he thought. "Jae-won," she said, "no. Listen to me. No." She swore. She swore on Seon-woo's life. She swore on her mother's grave. She swore on every version of herself she had ever been and every promise she had ever made. She looked him in the eyes, those eyes she had looked into 1,000 times and never once felt the need to hide from, and she told him that she had never, not once, not for a single moment, been unfaithful to him. He looked back at her, and he believed her. And then he looked at the document again, and the document did not care what he believed. "I cannot reconcile what you are saying with what is in front of me," he said. "Then find another explanation," she begged, "because I'm telling you the truth." He couldn't. He wasn't a man who trusted feelings over evidence. He was a man who had survived by reading facts, and the fact, as far as he could see, was only one thing. He filed for divorce 6 weeks later. If this story is breaking your heart, good. That means you're paying attention. Subscribe so you don't miss the ending. Leave a comment. Have you ever been accused of something you didn't do? The divorce was quiet by the standards of what Kim Jae-won was capable of. He did not try to erase her. He did not weaponize his power against her. He made sure she was financially protected. He made sure Seon-woo, who was responding well to treatment, thank God, could see her without restriction. He did these things because some part of him, the part he refused to listen to, was not entirely sure. But certainty is a tyrant, and the documents were certain, so Jae-won obeyed them. Adaeze left Korea 3 months after the divorce was finalized. She went back to Lagos. She went back to her research. She went back to the version of herself that existed before Kim Jae-won, and she tried, as best as she could, to reassemble her life from the pieces. She did not stop loving him. She also did not stop knowing that she was innocent. Both of those things were true simultaneously, and they were both unbearable. Jae-won buried himself in work. His empire expanded, his reputation solidified. His face grew harder in a way that even his loyal men noticed, though no one said aloud. He visited Seon-woo every week without fail. The boy, now 11, was too smart not to feel the fracture in the air, but also too wise, with his mother's wisdom, to push it. He accepted what he was given and loved both of his parents from a distance that had been placed between them by grown-up things he did not yet understand. 2 years passed. And then, because Jae-won was not a man built for solitude, because loneliness had been his constant companion before Adaeze, and he had been foolish enough to believe he had escaped it, he remarried. Her name was Park Soo-yeon. She was Korean, beautiful, from a family that moved in political circles. The marriage was not a love story. It was an alliance, an arrangement, sensible, strategic, and comfortable in the way that things are when no one is too foolish to feel too much. Soo-yeon knew what she was marrying. She accepted the terms. Jae-won thought, this is safer, this is simpler, this is how things should be. 14 months after the marriage, Soo-yeon told him she was pregnant. Jae-won felt something he didn't expect, a flicker. Not the overwhelming joy of before, something quieter, something cautious. He said the right things, he prepared the right things, and then, because lightning can strike twice, and because Kim Jae-won was a man who now knew that documents were more reliable than feelings, he requested a prenatal paternity test. He told Soo-yeon it was routine, a formality, that it was simply something he needed. She was insulted. She said so. He understood. He asked anyway. The results came back. He was not a match. Again. Kim Jae-won sat alone in his office for 3 hours after reading the second result. He did not call anyone. He did not move. He simply sat and looked at what the paper said and tried to understand how this was possible. 2 women, 2 pregnancies, 2 DNA tests, 2 results that said the same thing. He was not the father. Except he knew with the bone-deep certainty of a man who had lived every moment of his life in his own body that he had not strayed, not once, not from either wife. He had not been unfaithful to Adaeze, and he had not been unfaithful to Soo-yeon. He confronted Soo-yeon. She denied it, crying, furious, humiliated. He looked at her face and saw something he had not been able to see when he looked at Adaeze's face, because Adaeze's had wrecked him too completely to think clearly. He saw a woman who was telling the truth. He sat with that for a long time. And then, slowly, like a man turning over a rock he's been afraid to look under, a thought formed. What if it isn't them? What if it's me? He went back to the doctors, not the one who had delivered the first result, a specialist, a geneticist, one of the best in the country. He sat across from her and explained what happened, clinically, without emotion, as though he were describing a problem in someone else's business. When he finished, the doctor was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Have you heard of Chimerism?" There are, in the universe of human biology, events so rare and so extraordinary that they read like science fiction. One of them is called chimerism. Here is what happened to Kim Jae-won before he was born. His mother conceived twins, 2 embryos, 2 sets of DNA, 2 separate beginnings. But in the earliest days, when the cells were still deciding what to become, something unusual occurred. The 2 embryos fused. They merged into one. One body, one person. One person containing inside himself 2 complete and distinct sets of DNA. The twin that had been its own beginning didn't vanish. It was absorbed. It became part of Kim Jae-won, not as a separate entity, not as a ghost, but as a biological reality woven into the very fabric of his cells. Kim Jae-won was, scientifically, his own twin. Different parts of his body carried different DNA, his blood, his organs, his tissues, each operating from different genetic instruction sets, like 2 orchestras playing different scores in the same concert hall. When his children were conceived, it was not the DNA in his blood that passed on. It was the other DNA, the twins, the one that lived in other cells. So when the doctors tested his blood to see if it matched his children, it didn't, because the DNA in his blood was not the DNA that made his children. Both Seon-woo and the child Soo-yeon carried were his, completely, biologically, unambiguously his, and neither Adaeze nor Soo-yeon had ever betrayed him, not even close. The geneticist explained all of this with the measured calm of someone delivering information so strange it requires a particular kind of steadiness. Jae-won listened. He didn't speak for a very long time. When he finally did, his voice was different from every voice he had ever used, in boardrooms, in negotiations, in war, in love. It was the voice of a man who has just watched the entire architecture of his understanding of himself collapse and is trying to find what is left standing. "My first wife," he said. "She didn't cheat?" "Based on what you've described, almost certainly not." "My second wife." "The same applies." He stood up. He walked to the window. He stood there for a long time looking at Seoul, the city he had dominated for 15 years, the city that feared him, the city that had never once given him anything he didn't take. He thought about a woman in a jazz bar, laughing without permission. He thought about 6 days. He thought about a promise she had asked him to keep. He thought about what he had done. He found Adaeze the same way he had found her the first time, quietly, carefully, without announcement. She was in Lagos. She was running a research clinic now, her own. She had, with the same stubborn resilience that had first drawn to her, built an entirely new life from the rubble of the old one. He did not call ahead. He arrived. She was in the middle of a meeting when they told her someone was waiting. She came out expecting a colleague. She found Jae-won. He looked, she would say later, like a man who had walked very far and wasn't sure he deserved to arrive. She said nothing. She gestured for him to follow her into a private room. He sat down across from her at a small table, not the sweeping dining table of their old life, not the kitchen where he had placed those documents in front of her, just a plain table in a clinic in Lagos, the most honest setting they had ever been in. And then Kim Jae-won, the ghost, the man no one could read, the man who had never once in his professional life said, "I was wrong," looked at his ex-wife and said, "I was wrong. About everything. About you. About all of it." He told her what the doctors had found. He told her what he was. He told her that every instinct she had ever had, every plea, every swear, every tear, had been true, and he had chosen a document over her truth because he was a man who was too afraid of what it would mean if he trusted her and she betrayed him, and so he made the betrayal real himself from fear of it happening. Adaeze listened to all of this. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "I know you're sorry." "Yes," he said. "And I know that you are telling the truth right now." "Yes." She looked at him for a long moment. "I loved you," she said. "I loved you in a way I had never loved anything. I would have walked through fire for this marriage. I begged you. I swore to you. I had nothing left to give you, and you still chose to leave." "I know," he said. "And you need to understand," she continued very calmly, "that being right is not the same as being repaired, that the truth coming out doesn't undo what was lost." He nodded. "Our children," she said, "that is the bridge we will always share. I will not deny Seon-woo his father, but I will not also pretend that an explanation, even a true one, heals everything." "I don't expect it to," he said. "I came because you deserved to hear it, because I owe you the truth, not because I expect anything in return." She looked at him. He looked at her. Between them was everything they had been, and everything that had broken, and every year that had passed in between.
She said, "Thank you for coming." He said, "I'm sorry, Adaeze. I'm sorry I chose a test over you." He left. She sat in that room for a long time after he was gone, and then she called Seon-woo, who was 15 now, and still had her eyes, and she told him that her father had done something very difficult and very necessary and very good. Seon-woo, who was his mother's son, said, "Does that mean things will be better now?" "Some things, yes, I think so." Jae-won returned to Seoul. He sat down with Soo-yeon and told her everything. He handed her the full picture, what his body was, what it had done to their DNA test, what it meant for the child she was carrying. He told her that he owed her an apology of a different kind, not for the divorce, they would still separate, that had never been a love story and they both knew it, but for the way he had confronted her, for the accusation, for the doubt he had worn openly and put on her. She accepted the apology with grace. Their child, a daughter, was born healthy and luminous and nothing short of miraculous, as all children somehow are. Jae-won held her and thought, "I almost missed this. I almost decided what was true before I understood what was real." He commissioned a full medical study on his chimerism, contributed to research that would eventually help other chimeric individuals understand their own bodies, their own paternity tests, their own moments of impossible results. He made sure Seon-woo knew everything, not in the way adults protect children from truth, but in the way parents who respect their children tell them what they can bear to know, carefully and honestly. Seon-woo, at 15, heard the full story of their family's fracture and their family's science. He said, "So you're literally two people?" Jae-won said, "In a way." Seon-woo considered this. "Which one is my dad?" he asked. Jae-won looked at him for a long moment. "Both of them," he said. "They're both me." Seon-woo nodded slowly, the way his father nodded when something was settled. "Okay," he said. "That's weird, but okay." Adaeze in Lagos continued her work. She dated, eventually, slowly, carefully, in the way people who have been through real love and real loss approach the idea of trying again. She did not close herself off from the world. She was too much herself for that, too full of laugh and question and joy to let grief be the final word. She did not forget Jae-won. She also did not wait for him. She became instead something she perhaps always was, a woman who had faced something incomprehensible, who had told the truth when no one believed her, and who had survived the not believing with her integrity intact. There is no more powerful thing a person can be.
Before we close this story, let's sit with what it asks of all of us. Because this isn't just a story about a chimera, it's a story about what we do when the evidence in front of us contradicts the person standing right there, swearing their truth. First, when someone you love tells you the truth and the truth sounds impossible, stop, breathe, ask more questions before you act. Kim Jae-won had access to the world's best resources. He had money, power, intelligence. What he did not have in that moment was patience. He made a permanent decision from a temporary misunderstanding. Not every result means what you think it means. Not every test tells the whole story. And not every explanation has been discovered yet. Before you destroy something real, exhaust every other possibility first. Second, loyalty is not the absence of doubt. It is the choice to seek understanding before rendering judgment. Doubt is human. It visits everyone who has ever loved someone deeply. The question is not whether you feel doubt, it's what you do when it arrives. Do you investigate? Do you ask? Do you pursue truth with the same energy you pursue accusation? Or do you let a moment of fear make a decision that years of love cannot undo? Third, When you are wrong, especially when you are catastrophically, devastatingly wrong, go and say so. Not because it fixes everything, it won't, but because the person you wronged deserves to hear it. There is a particular kind of courage required to walk back into the life of someone you've hurt and say, "You were right and I was wrong, and I'm here to say so even though I can't change it." It doesn't fix what broke, but it restores something: dignity, truth, closure. It is the least you can do. Do it anyway. Fourth, if you are the one who was wrongly accused, hold on to yourself. Adaeze did not become bitter. She did not close. She did not let what was done to her become the defining story of who she was. She kept building. She kept working. She kept laughing. Yes, still laughing, in jazz bars and clinics and her mother's kitchen and anywhere else she happened to be. She knew the truth about herself, and she kept knowing it even when the world around her disagreed. That kind of self-knowledge is not stubbornness, it is survival, it is self-respect, it is the armor that gets you through. Hold on to it. Fifth, the human body, the human story, is more complex than any test can fully measure. Kim Jae-won's chimerism is real. It happens. There are documented cases of individuals who are their own twins, whose DNA differs across different parts of their bodies, who have failed paternity tests for children who are biologically theirs. The science is still catching up to the mystery of human biology. What this means practically is this: results are not always conclusions. Data points need context, and extraordinary cases require extraordinary investigation. If you ever find yourself facing an impossible result in medicine, in science, in life, don't stop at impossible. Dig deeper. There may be a truth underneath the truth, and it may change everything. And finally, love, when it is real, leaves fingerprints. Jae-won carried Adaeze in everything he did, in the way he treated Seon-woo, in the way he eventually acknowledged his wrongs, in the way he could not simply move through his second marriage as though the first one hadn't wrecked and remade him. Real love doesn't evaporate when a relationship ends. It becomes part of how you move through the world. It changes you at a cellular level. And in Jae-won's case, we mean that more literally than most. Love what you have while you have it. Tell the truth while you still can. And when someone you trust swears to you on everything they have, sit with that. Really sit with it, before you let a document decide what a person is. Kim Jae-won still runs his empire. He is older now, a little quieter. The men around him say he's different, not softer exactly, but more considered, as though he weighs his certainties more carefully before he acts on them. Adaeze still laughs too loudly in rooms and asks questions that make people feel slightly outwitted. Seon-woo is 20 years old and studying medicine. He wants to understand rare genetic conditions. He has his mother's eyes and his father's stillness, and somewhere deep in the structure of his life, the full, complicated story of two people who loved each other and were undone by a secret his father's own body had been keeping for decades. He thinks about them sometimes, his parents, their story, and he thinks, what a strange and human thing, to be undone not by betrayal, but by biology, to be separated not by lack of love, but by the limits of what anyone knew to be possible. He thinks, I will spend my life finding the things no one knows to look for, so that other families don't have to lose each other to the truth. That is the story of Kim Jae-won, the man who was two people, the man who lost everything to a truth hiding inside himself, the man who eventually, slowly, imperfectly, at great cost, found his way back to truth. And that is enough. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe, because next week, the story we're telling is one you will not be able to stop thinking about. And leave a comment. What would you have done in Adaeze's place? Until next time, stay curious, stay kind, and never stop asking, what else could be true?